All right, welcome in. This is the Front Row Podcast with Coach Mike Gottfried, and this is going to be a lot of fun today because I've got two guys that are obviously very dear to me. I've got my father, Joe Gottfried, and his brother, Mike Gottfried, my uncle, who everybody refers to as Uncle Mike. And both of these two guys have had an amazing career in coaching and administration and athletics overall. Just real quickly before I bring him in and say hello, Mike Gottfried was the head football coach at Murray State, Cincinnati, Kansas, Pittsburgh, spent 17 years on the primetime game at ESPN, and then later created an organization called Team Focus, which focuses in on fatherless boys, and it's just been an amazing run that he's had as far as impacting lives. And then my father, Joe Gottfried, was high school basketball coach, then a small college basketball coach, a Division I basketball coach, and then became the athletic director at University of South Alabama for almost 30 years and had an incredible impact there. But these two guys have had more influence on me than anybody in my life. So welcome, Mike Gottfried and Joe Gottfried. This is going to be a lot of fun.
We're looking forward to it.
So to start off with, and we talk a lot about this, but I'd like for you guys to talk a little bit, and you guys can just kind of jump in wherever you want to, but just kind of growing up. You guys grew up in a small town in north central Ohio called Crestline, Ohio, and there were so many amazing people that came out of this small town, a small railroad town, but talk a little bit about the influence that town had on you guys as you were young people growing up and becoming young adults.
Well, I can start on that, Mark. There were 10 stoplights in Crestline, too. You went through it there one time, you only counted 2. But anyway, we had a great upbringing. The community in Crestline was very close. And in where we lived in the south side, we were a group of guys, that we grew up together. There were probably 8 or 10 of us, played together throughout high school then. And I think Mike and I went into coaching. There was one person, Mike can talk about a little bit more, named Coach Hudson, Merle Hudson. He influenced more individuals. And Mark, we've probably had 8 or 9 coaches that have been in college coaching from Crestline. One man, we always admired him. He was our summer coach. He coached football, and when he was coaching football, we were still young, and so we watched him and how he worked with kids and how he tried to help them, to place them sometime in a job. And so that person, Merle Hudson, was so influential to so many of us. Mike, you can expand on that.
Mike?
Mark, he was such a good man. I would watch him, and he would carry the groceries for his wife. He'd open the door for his wife. He never swore. He was in church every Sunday, and everybody wanted to be like him. And the first job I had as coaching, I was the head coach at Roseville High School, and we were practicing the first day. And I walked away, and a young man, and one of our football players said, Coach, and I wouldn't answer, and I was kept walking, and he said, no, Coach, and he came up to me and he grabbed me. He said, why aren't you answering? I said, what did you call me? He said, Coach. I said, oh, there's only one coach. It's Coach Hudson. I couldn't even accept the coach name because this guy was beloved, and he was a great man.
I obviously growing up, I mentioned nobody's had more of an influence on me than you two guys. And both of you, throughout your lives, whether it was in coaching or administration or Mike with your organization, the thing that's been the most impressive is the impact that you've had on other people. So everywhere I go, if I come across, a player that played for my Uncle Mike, if I come across somebody that worked with Mike at ESPN, if I come across a coach that coached with my dad or coached under my dad as he was an athletic director, somebody he's hired. They always talk about how much you two both cared about people. You're interested in people. And where do you think that kind of generated from? Because it's a trademark that you both have, and it's been consistent all throughout your lives that you have made an impact and helped people along the way. Where do you think that kind of came from?
I think with me, Coach Hudson, because I saw him and I watched him every day. We would go down and we play baseball. He taught us how to drive. He taught us how to swim. I never learned how to swim because my mom gave us a quarter to go down to the park, and I'd spend 10 cents on this, and I didn't go into swimming, so I had another Royal Crown. So he was great.
Dad, how about you? The impact on people that you've had. Where do you think that came from?
Mark, I think from me, it obviously part of it was Coach Hudson, and without a doubt. And I think the other part, losing our dad at such a young age, and feeling like he would have done that for us. He was kind of like that in the community. He started a booster club in Crestline, and Little League got that started. And I think for me too, not having my dad, at age 15, and Mark 11 and Johnny 7, that influenced me to kind of help, because I know if he would have lived, how he would have been that way. So I would have to say my dad and Coach Hudson, those two.
Mark, that was a bad day. April 3rd, 1956. 3:00 in the morning, he got up to walk to the restroom, and he keeled over and he fell on his back. And so Mom said to Joe right away, he's 15 years old, go get the doctor. Back then you didn't have 911, so he got dressed and ran to get the doctor. My mom told me, put a washcloth on his forehead. And I did, and she said, help him. And Johnny was just looking. It seemed like a long time till the police came, but then they got us out of the room and they said he had passed away. But I never felt a loss, and we had the funeral, and you just didn't know what was going to happen. And then we had to split up, and I always say Bill Harbaugh was the toughest guy in Crestline, and he had his family, and so they sent me over to his house to live. So I lived there 6 months, and it was great. And I just thankful that we were in a small town, and we would have a shot at doing something, after that death, but that death changed our whole life.
Mark, let me just go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Say
Dan.
one thing at the end, but when we buried my dad, he was a railroad engineer, and the Pennsylvania Railroad ran right beside the cemetery. And when they were lowering the casket, I'll never forget it, my legs kind of gave out, but all of a sudden a freight train went by. There were a lot of freight trains in 1956. 38 years later, when the casket was lowered for my mom, a freight train went by, and there weren't many freight trains 38 years or 30-some years later. So
every time I hear a train whistle, I think the Lord's saying everything's going to be okay.
So you guys are, young, and obviously you had the two of you and then your younger brother, who's no longer with us, Johnny Gottfried. And you wake up, and I can't imagine, because I've always had my dad, for my entire life. But you wake up, and it probably takes a bit of time to settle in, but, all of a sudden you're realizing that, my father's not there. And I'm sure throughout your entire lives to this day, because obviously we talk about it a lot, but the impact of just that moment, because it had to hurt so bad, just had to be. But you have to get on. You have to keep going. You have to get up and keep going, even though that's such a tragic thing. So, talk a little bit about that. And Dad, you were the oldest of 3 boys. Your 2 younger brothers, and kind of your mindset there, that what happens right after that, because now you don't have your father, and there's these 2 younger brothers, Dad, that you have now, and maybe right when it happened, or give me some of your thoughts on that.
Well, let me go. The night before he died, it was a Monday night, and he took me to the bowling alley, and they had a pool table there. So we played pool, and he beat me the first game bad, beat me the second game bad. I took that pool stick and I threw it on the pool table. I said, I quit. And he came over and he grabbed my arm. And he looked at me and said, don't you ever say that again. And you know what? I never forgot that. Through my whole career, I never quit. I mean, I got fired a few times, but I never quit. And I always try to, stress that to the players about quitting, 20 points down or 30 points or 1 point. You never quit. So that really impacted me. And then, going to the school and going to schools and seeing the other guys with their dads, football games, guys I played with. And that I would look over and I wanted him back somehow, but I never got over it. That's kind of, I'm 84 years old, and I still think a lot about him and how our lives might have been different, or just having him here. And I remember my first game I coached at Bloomville High School, small rural school in Ohio. I came on the floor and I looked out in the crowd. I was hoping, I was thinking, God, if Dad would be in here seeing me coaching now, because he always wanted to be a coach, I think, and never had the opportunity. But I never lost sight, Mark. 84 years old, and there's nights where I'll still tear up thinking about him.
Mike?
But,
same way, you see all the fathers with their sons after a game. My mom worked. She was a waitress. She had to go work to provide for us. And so, there was nobody there. Grandma was come. Mimi was there. She would come to a lot of games. But, it just had a big effect on our life. I still cry.
Mark, my senior year, we had a new basketball coach, and he invited the fathers down the locker room after the game. We had a good run. We won 21 in a row. And all those fathers that came down, I looked at them, but they always came over to me. And the one thing, let me add this, Mark. Johnny, our younger brother, got hit with a stick when he was 7. And we had to rush him to the hospital over in Main Street in his eye. And he lost his eyesight till he was 18 years old, and then he removed the eye. But I think that was a big factor contributing my dad's death. Seeing Johnny at 7 years old, had to wear a patch on his eye. And there's another story I could tell you later on Johnny, but he was, the 3 of us were so close during the course of our lifetime. You never swayed each other.
You mentioned the youngest brother that you guys had in my uncle. I call him Uncle Johnny. I just grew up with and Uncle Johnny. But, Johnny Gottfried, worked for the water company there in a small town in Crestline, but later, moved to Alabama, moved to Mobile. But, Johnny, interesting, of the 3 of you, which obviously, all 3 of you guys are amazing, and, obviously Dad and the impact you've had on me, but Johnny's another one where everywhere you went, and Johnny was working at ESPN with Mike. He was doing some spotting from the booth up there during college football games, and he only had one eye. But Johnny, would say same thing. People would say to me everywhere I went, and people that in the media that knew Johnny, and the announcers and the broadcasters, and just people that I would come across, the Tim Brandos and Ron Franklins and all the guys that worked. They all talked about Johnny and how much they loved Johnny, and what a great And we lost Johnny at an early age. Johnny passed, but the influence that you two had to feel with a younger brother without a father. And talk a little bit about maybe how you felt and maybe what was going through your mind as far as trying to help Johnny along the way throughout his life, because there wasn't a father there. There wasn't somebody else other than you two.
Johnny was so instrumental in everything we did. When he said he was going to move to Joe called me and he said, Johnny's coming. I said, Joe, we don't have a job for him yet. He said, he's on his way. And he came in a hurricane. Every car's going out of Mobile. There's a U-Haul going in. And it was Johnny. But he did so much. But I thought about going back to coaching. And I thought after it was all done, there was one day where Dean Billick called me. He was the athletic director when I got fired at Pittsburgh, and he was an assistant athletic director, and he called me. I was in Colorado with two team-focused boys. And so he said, Mike, we have the job for you. We talked to the president. You can be the football coach at Cincinnati again. That was probably in 2004 or 5. And so I got off the phone, and Mickey said, why are you smiling? I said, I'm smiling because they want me to coach again. I want to do this. I want to go back and win some games. And she said, what about the boys? And I said, what boys? And she said, the boys you said you'd be walking with in life. And it's like Mark, she threw cold water on me. And I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back to coach after she told me that. I'm glad I never went back.
Hey, Mark, how about this story on Johnny? Mike was coaching at college. I was coaching in college, and we give out scholarships. And some scholarships, you base it on financial need. And so Johnny worked at the waterworks in Crestline. He read the meters. And so all of a sudden, I think Johnny thought, so he looked at a lot of those meters of people that couldn't afford them, really. So he didn't kind of read it the way he was supposed to. So when he left Crestline to move to Mobile, all of a sudden the revenue in the waterworks increased after he left. He had a lot of people on scholarship.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Here's what stands out to me. You guys both as coaches, and I'm sure I'll get all these wrong, but Class A Coach of the Year, High School Coach of the Year, Basketball Coach of the Year, Joe Gottfried, Football Coach of the Year, Mike Gottfried, in the same year. You guys had incredible runs in high school. Then you guys both had incredible runs as coaches in college. And I can remember, growing up at Ashland University, which is, it was back then, it was called Ashland College there in Ohio. And just the amazing run that you had in the winning and the NCAA tournaments. Mike, I go back and I can look through and remember, growing up and watching the winning at Murray State, the winning at Cincinnati, the massive wins at Kansas when you took your team on the road and beat SC at SC, or at Pitt when you're beating Ohio State or Notre Dame. So there's all these amazing runs, but I think what stands out to me more, like I mentioned earlier, is just the impact you've had on people. And Mike, I can remember, I told you this just last week, we were in Ohio together, and I told you about standing in the locker room or in this big meeting room at Murray State, and you had 100 guys, shoulder pads, getting ready to go play a football game, and they're holding hands and they're singing "Love Lifted Me." And I just remember as a young person thinking how impactful that is winning is important. We all want to win. I want to win, but the impact you had, Mike, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to go to my dad next. But Mike, I remember that moment vividly, and creating this family environment with your team. And talk a little bit about that and how you have, because I know you're very humble, but talk about that and the impact you've had or wanted to have with young people throughout your career as a coach.
Yeah, it was, a lot of things I think about the coaching and when I would go to a new job and meet the new players and so forth. But what became important is affection. You put your arm around them, which you've done in coaching, and pat them on the back and tell them how well they're doing. And then attention, a lot of the young men that we work with now without fathers, they need attention. And the last thing was the most important, affirmation. When you affirm somebody, they feel better about themselves, so they play better. And but that was the hope that we would become a team. And I remember Joe was when he was a senior in high school. They got beat by Bassar's High School, and they were 0-1, and they had a new coach, John McNabb. And they pulled up the bus, and all the players got out, and he said, go in the gymnasium and sit on the bleachers. So they all went in there. And Joe told me this story, and he said, the coach told him, he said, you seniors, and Joe was a senior, he said, you're done. We don't have a winning record by Christmas. You're done. So that made an effect on me. And they won 21 straight games. They didn't lose again. So I used that at Kansas. We got beat by Northern Illinois the first game, and we got Wichita State coming next. So I told them, I said, hey, we're not winning this game. All you seniors are done. They played hard, and we won at USC, which was a big win. We beat Oklahoma at home, which was a big win. So that was a sticking point with me.
All right, Dad, here's one for you. So again, the winning, you had amazing wins, and you had a great career as a coach, but then you became an administrator, and you got into becoming an athletic director at University of South Alabama. And one story that stands out to me, Dad, was, and I don't even know if you remember this or not, but I'm coaching at NC State, and my dad, Joe Gottfried here, had fallen, and know all that happened, but you had a kind of an emergency situation where they needed to relieve some of the blood out of your brain. And you were in the hospital in Mobile, and we had I can't remember what day of the week it was, but we played a game at NC State, and I got on a plane the next morning, flew to Mobile, got to the hospital. We're all sitting in the room with you, and they had waited to take you back, I think, until like 11 o'clock so that I could get there and see you before they went in. And I remember there was a young nurse that came into your hospital room, and I don't know if you remember this or not, but the nurse said to you, she said, Coach, do you remember me? And you were a little bit like, maybe, kind of. And the girl said, well, I was an athlete at South Alabama. And she said, we did a banquet at the end of the year, every year with the seniors, the senior athletes, and when the banquet ended, she said, you came up to me and said, so now that you're graduating, what are you going to do? And she said, well, I'm probably going to have some kids and start a family. And you said, you should have a career. You should have a career, and, your children will be proud of you. Not that they wouldn't have been proud if she didn't work, but you really emphasized to her of doing something amazing for herself. And she then told the story. She said, Coach, that's why I got into becoming a nurse. She said it was because of you. And I remember the impact that had on that one person who was a female athlete at the University of South Alabama, who then decided to build a career and was thankful to you for that. So, those are the stories I remember. I remember all the wins. I remember all the things. I remember when, the ups and downs. But that, Dad, that was an example of the impact you had on people. So talk a little bit about that. And again, that, because you've always had it, Dad. You've been interested in other people. You make them feel amazing about themselves. And some of that, and maybe kind of where that mindset came from you, or just kind of that impact that you've had.
Mark, I always felt close to the athletes. I still communicate with a lot of the players back in, when I was coaching in high school 50 years ago. And when I was at Ashland, the same way. And I think it came back to my dad and Coach Hudson again, that type of thing. I always wanted to try to be of help to somebody. Because I ran into a lot of, coaches that competed against, or maybe administrators. And I saw a lot of times I never saw that. So I think really it just came natural to me, though, of wanting to third team person on the third team in whatever sport. When I was at South Alabama, we had 15 sports, and I tried to do the extra things as much as I possibly could to try to help guide, because I always felt they needed guidance, at least an opinion. And I always left it with, if I can ever be of help to you, here's my phone number. Don't hesitate to call. And I did receive different calls at different times. So, but that part came natural for me. But I think it goes back to my dad would have done the same thing. Coach Hudson did the same thing. So that never left. And I think I hopefully passed it on to some, yourself and Christy, my daughter, and the players that you had, the coaches that you had. We're not in this world forever. And I wanted to always make them feel that I'm available to help you. I'll make a call if you ask me to. I'll do that. So,
you guys, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was thinking about something I learned from Joe. And I teach these 10-year-olds, 11, 12, 13, without a father. I say, learn to be an expert in something, whether it's changing tires, whether it's oil, whether it's football, whether it's being an expert in something.
You guys have always been close. And so there's also an impact that you probably don't even realize, just a natural impact with Mike, with your children, still to this day with Johnny's children, obviously Dad with your children, but the emphasis, and it trickles down through our children and then hopefully their children, which my sister Christy has some grandchildren, which are your great-grandchildren, but the whole family feels the impact or the stress and importance that you guys put on family. Like, family has been so important. You've had great success, both of you as individuals, but the family has been important. And I remember growing up again, I remember hearing stories and listening to stories, but and I think, Dad, you were on the sidelines with Mike. I want to say it was in the Coliseum when Mike was the head football coach at Kansas and they went in to play SC. And just talk about that day or that game or being on the field there, Dad, watching your younger brother take a football team into USC.
I remember that so well. Johnny and I flew on the Kansas plane with Mike and his team. And anyway, I'm out there on the sidelines and looking at Southern Cal. Their linemen were 6'6", 260 or 6'7". And I'm looking at Kansas, their linemen were 6'2", 6'3", and I think this is going to be a blowout. And Mike comes over. We're standing, and he said, "I think we got a chance to win." And he said, look like they're not preparing for us. And he goes back on the field, and Johnny looks at me. I look at Johnny and think, I don't think this How do you compete with them? They're that big, and I think they ended up beating USC 26-6 or something. And I stood there, Mark, and I feel like it was yesterday. I stood there, and I looked up, and I thought, if my dad was here. Anyway, it's a big win for him.
Mike, do you remember that day? Obviously you do. As
Yeah.
the head coach at Kansas, going into USC and finding a way to win. Talk about that day.
Yeah, Ted Toner was the coach, and I have Southern Cal, and I liked him a lot. We did some things in the off season together and with the Dallas Cowboys, but it was a great win. And but I was already worried about the next game. You couldn't enjoy the wins yet. You had somebody tough the next week, so you had to really turn the page of that. And I said one day I'll enjoy the victories. But Mark, I think about the losses more than the wins.
Yeah.
The ones that got away, the opportunities. So,
Hey, Mark, let me relate a story. It ties in with all this. You talk about influence. We had a player. I was assistant coach at the time. We had a player at Ashland, Earl Hill, good player. Anyway, what Earl did one day, he in the dormitory, he busted the phone off of the. We didn't have payphones back then, and he had an old Cadillac, and he's driving out in the streets of Ashland, and he was on the phone. Nobody was on the phone during that time, and he had this old beat up Cadillac. And anyway, the police arrested him. They had him in jail, and he had one phone call, so he called me, and I went down and got him out of jail, and I never forgot that. I mean, never. And we're very close. And
Earl Hill was ahead of his time back in the 1970s with his phone and his Cadillac. It wasn't connected to anything, but it looked good.
Yeah. How about this then? Tell him that story, Mike.
he helped us recruit a receiver from Baton Rouge, and we beat LSU on him at Pittsburgh. So I think about, sports is what we liked, and it was, if there weren't sports, I would have been out of luck. But I think about two things I've learned. Pete Rose, who you're going to have on your podcast, but he told me a story one time about his dad would write him every day in minor leagues, and he said, "You're going to make it." He said, "But don't be satisfied." And I asked Pete, I said, "What did that mean to you? Don't be satisfied." He said, "If you get one hit, you got to get two hits. If you get two hits, you got to get the third hit. And don't be satisfied. 4 hits, 5 hits." Pete Rose was all-time hit leader, but he had the most 5-hit games, 4-hit games, 3-hit games, because his father told him, "Don't be satisfied." Isn't that something?
It's amazing.
Mark, I remember distinctly, and maybe it all ties together too. And when you were a freshman in high school, and you said you wanted to earn a Division I scholarship, and you wrote it on the headboard of your bed. And I'll never forget, I can remember we were in bed sometimes in the evening, and all of a sudden I hear a ball bouncing. It's 11:30 at night. I look out. You're only a freshman. I look out in the driveway. You're playing basketball, shooting by yourself. It's the one sport you can do by yourself. And I never forgot that. And you know what? 4 years later, you had more than one Division I scholarship.
Yeah. Interesting. It's amazing. So I'm going to go back to a day that I'm going to jar your guys' memories, but the first time I'd gotten fired, and being fired is hard, and from any job, but college athletics, it's very public. It's hard because the whole country is watching, and everybody's paying attention. But, I was there at Alabama, and I'm no longer the coach at Alabama, and the three of us went to a McDonald's in the morning to have coffee. I don't know if you guys even remember this. We sat in a McDonald's, and I think, Mike, you were, and people have to understand, Mike, when you were growing up as a younger coach coming up through high school then college, I've told people many times, probably one of the most respected offensive minds in football. And you would go into Dallas every year into the Cowboys organization and share your ideas with those guys there. And Gil Brandt, the amazing front office guy with the Cowboys, was just amazing to you and all the people in Dallas. And but then at some point in college athletics, you got fired. And then I can remember, Dad, the runs you've had, and as a small college coach and a Division I basketball coach and a high school coach and all the winning, and boom, here it comes. That happens one day. It happens in coaching, where you're fired. And then here I am. I've been at UCLA, won a national championship, and went to Murray State for 3 years, had a great run. Was at Alabama 11 years and had a great run. And all of a sudden, the three of us are sitting in a McDonald's, and you guys have always kind of been there for me to explain and to kind of nurture me through all the different things that have happened to me. But I do remember, kind of in a lighthearted way, trying to say, well, guys, I lasted longer than you. I think, Mike, you were 42, and Dad, you were 43 when you got fired, and I was 44, so I made it one more year past you guys. But all three of us, it happens. It happens in coaching that it's part of it sometimes, but you guys have always been there for me in that regard. And I even remember that morning, because, you feel like the world is going to end when that happens. Some people don't understand how hard that is, but you guys were always there for me. And maybe some thoughts on that, as far as, we've always helped me, but how that was for you guys both. When you're kind of at the highs, then you kind of hit the low part.
It was tough, because you're thinking, hey, nobody wants me to coach anymore. And so I remember very distinctly getting fired at Pittsburgh. But I probably should have got fired. And here's the reason why, Mark. I got off the path, and I was worried more. Back then, it was the agents. And I did a game, all-star game at the Blue-Gray game in Montgomery, Alabama. I saw all the agents and how they were paying the money, and I thought, this is wrong. And so I went back and started working against that players going out early. And so I got involved in that, and it got me off base a little bit. And then a game, we played, the last game I ever coached was at Rutgers and Dublin, Ireland. And before the game, the referees told me, he said, now, Mike, you're a ways away. You're 10 minutes away. Don't be late at halftime. And if you're late at halftime, we're going to penalize you. So we were ahead 22-7 at halftime. So we're in the locker room, and I hear all this noise. And the first mistake I made, I pulled Speck over. He was my manager, and he was with me at every college. I said, Speck, go over and tell the president of the university, keep the noise down. That was the first mistake. And so he went over and told him to keep the noise down. He said, I want the mayor of Pittsburgh to be able to speak to the team in half. And he told me that. Speck told me that. I said, that's not going to happen. That was his second mistake. And so we went right by him and all went out, because I wanted to win a game. I wasn't worried about the president. So I got fired on Tuesday, I think. And I deserved to get fired. So that's my firing story.
Dad, how about you? It was a tough moment. And I remember this. I'll tell people, you were the head coach at Southern Illinois University, and they made a decision to make a coaching change. And there for a couple of years, I was a sophomore and I was a junior in high school, and we weren't sure where we were going to live. And I remember you visiting. We went down to Florida, to Naples. You had a friend that was doing real estate there, and ultimately you got hired at South Alabama at first as the associate athletic director and then later got promoted. But just kind of that, boy, right when it happens, because I know for me, there were times I just wanted to go crawl up and lay in bed. It hurts so hard. It hurts so bad, when you lose a job like that. Do you remember that, Dad?
One thing, yeah, I sure do. I was a basketball coach at SIU, had a 4-year contract, and we struggled for, the second and third year. But we had a good program. I thought we were on the right track. Gail Sayers was our athletic director, and I loved him as a person. But thing that I learned from that, and as a coach then when I became the athletic director, patience. And if you understand sports, like I have over the course of the year following Mike in football and the basketball part that I had experienced. But anyway, I didn't get that 4th year. In my history in high school, when I was coaching at, Bloomville Rural School, we started to struggle first, but then we ended up my last 3 years, we were 59-10. And the same thing happened at Ashland. And Fred Martinelli was our athletic director and Bob Stokes. And I struggled for a couple of years, and they had the patience being former coaches, and we ended up had 3 straight years in the NCAA tournament and almost won a national title. And but I got that taken away, and I remember your mom and I weren't sure what we were going to do. Well, I was staying coaching or want to try something else. So I called. We played UAB when Gene Bartow was the basketball coach at UAB. So I became a friend. He invited me to Birmingham to speak at a clinic. And Joe Dean was the president of Converse. And I got to know him very well because we were a Converse school. And so I called both of them. I said, I'm not sure what I want to do. Do you have any ideas? And Gene, I'll never forget, he said there's an associate athletic directorship open at South Alabama. And he knew the basketball coach very well, Cliff Ellis. So that led to getting that job. But the thing I learned from that, and I had the patience when I was the AD. I don't remember firing many people when I was there, but I think I did. But I knew when coaches go struggling a little bit, and I could tell by their tennis program or, volleyball, whatever it was, do they have a chance to get the program turned around? So I was probably more patient than a lot of people would have done. Fortunately, they did turn it around. So that's what I then learned. You've got to be patient with coaches, and you've got to understand the program. And I see it, and I follow around the country, the people that weren't coaches, that were athletic administrators, didn't sometimes have the patience that a former coach who became an athletic director ended up. You learned that. And so I never forgot doing that.
That's impactful. Dad, I'm going to bring up this one for you. And this jersey here right behind me was a gift. Stan Van Gundy was the head basketball coach of the Detroit Pistons. And I was coaching at NC State and took our team into Cameron Indoor at Duke. Duke was loaded that year. Jason Tatum, Grayson Allen. I mean, they had some real pros, like long-term, big-time pros. And obviously, when you go in and play in Cameron Indoor at Duke, that's a tough place to play. It's a hard place to get a win. But anyway, this jersey right here is a gift that Stan Van Gundy gave me. I get back a few days after that win. We went into Duke and beat them, and we won the game at Duke. And I open up my mailbox, and I've got a package there from the Detroit Pistons. I'm trying to figure out what this is, and open it up, and it's this jersey. And this was the 400 represented the fact that was my 400th win as a head coach, Division I head coach. And it was a Detroit Pistons jersey. And Stan didn't know at the time, but, I had been drafted by the Pistons in 1987. And then this is now, years and years later, and I get this jersey right behind me from Stan Van Gundy. But I say all that to say, Dad, I remember you were at that game, in Cameron, sitting right behind the bench as NC State beat Duke at Duke. And I remember taking you down the hallway, and we went into the media room there, and just how, proud, you were as a dad that night.
Mark, I can remember that so clearly. I had never been to a game at Cameron. And to be sitting there when you ended up, and I remember Jason Tatum I thought, God, is this guy ever good? And you took that team in there and won. I was so proud of you. And I remember going down that hallway. You took me down the hallway, and when you were standing in front of the media, I stood there, and Mark, tears came through my eyes. And I come back to my dad again. I said, if my dad could have been here and saw his grandson, how proud he would have been. And that's how I felt. And, I get emotional a lot of times, but that was one of the best games I've ever seen. And the fact that you were coaching in it, I can remember it today. Gosh, I don't know how many years it's been, but what a big win that was. Cameron Indoor Arena.
And I can remember, obviously throughout the years, all the times, my phone would ring, and it would be you, Mike, where you always encouraged me or congratulated me. And it comes back to that family and our family and what an impact you two guys have had on all of us, but certainly on me. But I'm sure, Mike, at times through your career, the phone calls you got, or the fact that my dad was there at your games, or, vice versa, you were at his games, and, it's always been important to you two.
I learned something after I was out of coaching a while. This man invited me to come up to hear him sing the national anthem at this baseball, Christian baseball. And so I went up there, and I kept telling him, no, I said, I've heard that song before. I said, I don't need to go all the way to Cincinnati. But I did go. And God has plans for you. And I think that was a God moment in my life where this man started speaking. His name was Tom Arrington. And he said, they say, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And he said, that really shouldn't be like that. And he said, and it hit me like a brick in my head. Some days you win and some days you'll learn. When you lose a game, it's an opportunity, but you think about that all the time. And then I thought about, when I was a player and I was a senior, and we only had 2 senior players on the team at Moorhead, and we were playing at Western Kentucky. And I threw 4 interceptions in the first half, and nobody's talking to me. And I'm having a bad game. You had bad games sometime. You probably, as a coach, have had bad games. And so I'm talking to myself. I'm eating an orange, and I'm saying, Mike, you got to do better out there. I said, I'm trying. I'm talking to myself. So I go on the second half. I throw 2 more real quick, and the coach comes down and puts us, and nobody's talking to me. And we're already ahead 3-0. Our defense is playing their heart out, and I'm giving the game away. And so the coach came down. I loved him. Earl Bentley put his hand on my shoulder, and I said, Coach, I remember telling him, I said, Coach, you need to take me out. I don't have it today. And it seemed like a long time before he answered, but he answered me. He said, Mike, if we had anybody else, you'd have been out a long time ago. So I went back in through the 9th interception, went in the record book. I knew I'm in the record book now. But late in the game, I threw a pass to Tommy Gray, and he ran 95 yards, and we won the game. And so fast forward, because if everything kind of works its way in, and I'm coaching at West Virginia, Pittsburgh. I'm the head coach at Pittsburgh. We're playing West Virginia, and they're ahead 38-0 at halftime. What do you tell a team at halftime? I said, hey, let's have fun. Let's go play like we're in the backyard and Thanksgiving Day and play. So the quarterback was Alex Van Pelt. He's now the offensive coordinator of the Patriots. And so he throws a third interception in the second half. So I said, coach said, get him out. In my headset, he said, get him out. It's terrible. He done that. So I said, no, I'm going to talk to him. So I pulled him over and said, Alex, I said, do you think I should take you out? He said, Coach, I'm from West Virginia. He said, please take me out. He said, I'm stinking the place up. I said, no, I'm not going to take you out. He said, why? He said, he looked at me like I had two heads. I said, back in 1965, I went in the record book with 9 interceptions. I think you got a chance to take me out of the record book. So we got loose and we ended up tying. And it was like a victory coming back from the dead, like you're way down. But we came back and tied them. So some days you win, some days you learn.
Hey, Mark, can I relate a story on Mike? Kind of a funny story, though. We know, living in Alabama, how big football is. It's the king. I mean, basketball is second and probably always be that way. But Mike and Johnny are doing their first game at Alabama, and we're there. Your mom and I are there, and we stayed with you, so we didn't go back to Mobile. And I told Mike, I said, Mike, you got that 3-4 hour drive, and it's late at night. Be careful because State Patrol is out. So Mike no longer gets out of Tuscaloosa and the sirens playing. And so they pull him over and say, want to see your driver's license, sir. Mike gives him a driver's license and the guy reads, Gottfried, you did it. Hey, coach, you had a great game tonight. So just be careful going the rest of the way. He got picked up 2 more times on the way to Mope for speeding. And you know what? Coach, you had a great game. Great game. The next afternoon at 3:00, I'm driving through Thomasville. Your mom and I are in the car, and all of a sudden the lights go on. And I think, gee, I didn't think I was going fast. He pulls me over, and I'm thinking, maybe he recognizes the last name, Gottfried did a football game. And he's writing. So I thought, I got to figure this out some way. I said, sir, would you be interested in 2 basketball season tickets at Alabama? He kept writing and gave me an $85 ticket.
It must have been an Auburn fan. So I want to go back. I was hoping to talk about this earlier and I forgot, but I'm going back. So I want you guys to describe for people that are listening. So again, small town, Crestline, Ohio, and there was a garage. Your mom, my grandmother, had a garage behind her house, this little brick garage. I just drove by it, Mike and I, the other day, and it's tiny. It's tiny. It's not very big. It's probably a 2-car garage, but maybe a garage and maybe a car and a half could fit in there. But you guys put these wooden backboards with actual metal, real basketball rims. I think you had somebody in town make them for you maybe. But anyway, so we had a basketball hoop. We had a full court in this small little old brick garage. And I'm this young little guy. And you guys would get all your buddies over there. And everybody in Crestline, Ohio had a nickname, whether it was Tank or you had all these guys with names. For the longest time, I didn't even know their names. I didn't know their real names, but I was little. But I would hop in these little full court basketball games in the garage, and you guys would absolutely beat the living snot out of me. I mean, I was slammed into the wall, and then I can remember later in Ashland, Ohio, we had the basketball hooped up here in our garage, and same thing. Mike would come visit, or we'd play in the garage, and you guys first of all, you'd never let me win. I never got to win ever. I would go to my bedroom and cry after the games, but you guys just absolutely beat me up in there. But that little garage in Crestline, Ohio, and little did you know, or probably you did know back then, you were developing and teaching me how to be tough, just how to be tough. And but that community was tough, blue collar town, railroad town. But do you guys have memories of that garage and the games and the guys and just the way you'd beat each other up in there, Dad?
Mark, that was so much fun. We went out there as often as we possibly could. And in fact, Tank Runyon, Bob Runyon, what was former football coach at Crestline, he was in my class. And when it was all over and before we got ready to move, we made a jersey, took a T-shirt and put Tank's name on it. And we hung it on the rafters because he was a rebounding champion. He was bigger than most of us and he always bumping us and things like that. But we had great games, and I know you loved it when you came back to be able to go in that garage. And they tell me it's still there, the basket.
Oh, yeah.
And Tank's jersey's still there after 60 years. It's still.
Mike, I remember as a young guy, I'd go to your house and we'd wrestle. We always wrestled, and you just wrestle and pin me down and I couldn't get up. I was little. And you were always trying to teach that same thing of being tough. And you got to figure out a way to get up. And I'd be on the ground. I'd be ready to cry as a little guy. And you guys both did that. You taught maybe that toughness. And that toughness from Crestline, Ohio. And again, blue-collar town. And the way that you guys grew up. Was that part of who you were, Mike, and how you taught me that as well?
Goes back to Coach Hudson, because you didn't want to disappoint him in anything. I remember one time I was pitching out there, and I had to go to the bathroom, and he said, "Do you need to go to the bathroom?" I said, "No, Coach." I said, because I knew he'd take me out of pitching, and so I wet my pants, and I put dirt on it. He said, "I told you." He said, "You should have gone to the bathroom." But the toughness that you learn in that garage was there's two boys, two men, now 50-some years old, and they told Mickey the other day in Crestline, they said, we wanted to go in there, but we knew we were going to get beat up if we went in there. But we waited a long time, but we finally got in there, and they beat us up, and we loved it. So I don't know. There's something about toughness that you have to learn there.
Mike did that with Johnny in the house. Johnny was little, 7 or 8, and Mike was 4 years older. And one time he went through the window. They were playing basketball. Oh, my mom she was so furious. She said, "You're going to take that basket down." But we never took it down. She kind of left it do it. But he took Johnny right through the window.
So let's talk a little bit real quick about it was interesting just because the other day, and Dad, you've driven me by the house that you guys grew up in. Mike, you took me by the house, and just kind of a couple houses down the way, across the way, was the Harbaughs. And Jack Harbaugh, which is Jim, John, and Joni. Jack is their father. And you guys grew up there right down the street, couple houses apart from one another. And then, obviously John Harbaugh, goes on and has a great career in coaching, and now coaching for the Baltimore Ravens, wins the Super Bowl. Jim Harbaugh, Jack's other son, incredible run as a player in the NFL, and then, coaching at Stanford, Michigan. He now, obviously, with the Los Angeles Chargers. But that relationship there, Mike, you've always, and both of you had such an impact, even with Jack and his children. And I look back and I think of the opportunities, Mike, that you gave John Harbaugh in coaching. I think of the influence, Dad, that you've had on all of them. I think and Mike, you've hired Jack many times as a coach. Dad, you helped Jack get that coaching job at Western Kentucky. Without you, he wouldn't have never got it, I don't believe. I remember Jim Harbaugh, when he retired from playing and he was in the video room and he wanted to become the head football coach at University of San Diego. I remember Jim Harbaugh calling you, Dad, to get, how do I go through an interview? How do I interview? But you guys have had such an impact on not only Jack, who's, in your era, but then the children, John and Jim. And Mike, talk a little bit about that, with John and Jim in the sport of football and the opportunities they've had. And a lot of them, you helped them. You helped them along the way.
Well, when I think of toughness, I think of Bill Harbaugh. Bill and Marie Harbaugh raised those kids and did a great job. And Bill was a tough guy. He boxed, and he was boxing. He taught his boys to box, and but I think about all the things that he would. He was the oldest guy, Jack, and so I remember they would always throw the. They would do the bat where you do it, and then whoever threw it the farthest, you got to be the home team. And so, and I was looked up to all these guys because Jack was really the trailblazer. I would have never gone to college, but Jack went to college, and then Joe got a scholarship to Kent State. He played football. He was a quarterback, and then he went out for basketball, and he made the basketball team. So he was a two sports guy at Kent State. And then Jerry went to Finley, so I figured, hey, I'm going to go to college. I went to Moorhead. I had one offer, and that's the only offer, and I took it, and it was a great place, and Moorhead was a great place. I knew the president, I knew all my teammates. I loved them. When I was playing Ohio State, they called me, and we were playing Ohio State at Pittsburgh, and the news people call you on Thursday about the big game, and they said, I'll bet you wish you would have played Ohio State. I said, no, I'm glad I played in Moorhead because I knew the president, I knew all the coaches, and I loved it there. And I had a great time. So why would I want to go to Ohio State? And so we beat them Ohio State that night. I gave the game ball to my mom, and it was a great night.
Mm. And John
Mark,
let me say this real quick, Dad. And John Harbaugh, obviously now coaching the Baltimore Ravens, but John has always been, and John's been a guest on my podcast, but John Harbaugh has just been. He just to me just seems like a real genuine, caring person, and he's been amazing to you. Obviously, I think you gave him maybe his first coaching job, but even John and how he extends himself to your daughter Marcy. And how John has been so good throughout the years. And he remembers how you helped him in coaching, how you helped him get into coaching and then helped him along the way. Both of you have. But Mike, talk about that with John and how you helped him get started in coaching.
That was big because Jack came to work with us at Pittsburgh. He had lost his job at Western Michigan, and then John came, and so we hired John as a GA, and the Seattle Seahawks called me and they said, "Hey, we want you to do us a favor." And I said, "I'll do anything for you. What do you need?" And they said, "Sid Gilman is 62 years old. He's down in the dumps. He's a great coach. Down in the dumps, we want you to hire him to come to Pittsburgh and coach for a week." And I said, "I'll do that. I'll give him $2,000. And so I called Sid on the phone, and I said, "Sid, would you please come and help us at Pittsburgh?" Because they thought he was really low on and so he put his phone and it covered the thing, and I could still hear it. He said, Esther, it was his wife. He said, "They want me to come to Pittsburgh and coach him." He said, "Can I go?" And she said, "Go yesterday." So he came. And I put John in charge of it. I said, "John, take him to eat, take him where, get him to meetings." And so Sid was there a week. So John comes on the office after a week, and I said, "Hey, did Sid get off on the plane?" And he said, "No." I said, "I got bad news for you. He stayed." So he stayed the whole year. He made us all his plans. He stayed the whole year, but he invented some things in coaching, and John got to be a part of that. And one last thing I want to say about John, I call him every now and then, but Marcy texts him every game. And if he loses, she texts him. And he texts her back. I would have never texted her back. After a loss, I would have been in 24 hours. I wouldn't be able to do anything. But John answers right away, and he's a great coach, and he's a great young man.
Yep. Dad, that relationship you've had and helped those guys along the way, Jim, Harbaugh, and John. And then obviously you guys have great memories with Jack, their father, growing up right there, a couple doors down.
And Jack was really an outstanding quarterback in high school. But Bill Harbaugh, his dad, Mark, he might have been one of the toughest guys in Crestline.
Was
tough. Not many friends, but boy, he was tough. And I'll never forget this. When we buried my dad that day, and I'm walking away from the cemetery, or walking away from where we lowered my dad, and Bill Harbaugh came up to me. And I tell this to Judy, his daughter. He put his arm around me, and I'll never forget, he said, "Joe, if you ever need anything, you make sure you call me." And I saw a different side of Bill Harbaugh.
Yeah.
Completely. And we became very close after that. But,
interesting that, and part of, our lives, the Gottfrieds, it's just intertwined with the Harbaughs. They're just part of it. You grew up and, obviously in my era, my generation with Jim and John and Joni as well. Joni married Tom Crean, who used to coach at Marquette in Georgia. And then Jim and John's career, Jack and his wife Jackie. But the two families have always been, you can't help it. You're there and you're rooting for everybody. And but it's also interesting. You mentioned Jim and John's grandfather, Bill Harbaugh, which was Jack's dad. And I always love this story, and I'd love for one of you guys to tell the story. But your younger brother, my Uncle Johnny, worked for the water company there in Crestline, Ohio. And sometimes I guess he'd go by in the morning real early, and he'd beep the horn really loud. And I remember you guys telling me sometimes the window, Bill Harbaugh's window, he lived right beside your mother, but he would move the window back and make a gesture. But tell me just how tough and how kind of because I remember Bill Harbaugh as this tough, crusty old guy. That's just all I remember. I thought he was the meanest guy I'd ever met in my life whenever I'd interact with him when I was little. But tell that story a little bit, one of you, about how he would, with Uncle Johnny there.
Well, Johnny and Ronnie Ball, who was our friend there in the South Side, both worked in the waterworks. And different times at nighttime, my dad had passed away and Bill Harbaugh's wife, Marie, had passed away. Bill would just aggravate my mom sometime, and he'd take his knuckles and tap it on the wall. The walls were really kind of thin, and a lot of times it would wake my mom up. And so she'd get a hold of Johnny at nighttime and said what Bill Harbaugh did. So Johnny and Ronnie would have the waterworks truck, and they'd go right by Bill, and Bill slept in. And they'd go right in front of Bill's door, and they'd peep the horn, waking up Bill Harbaugh. And he'd so mad, he'd open up the curtain, and I can tell you he kind of lifted his arm up a little bit.
He'd give him
giving them a signal.
The impact that you guys have had on so many people is what resonates with everybody involved, and the impact that you guys have had on me. I've been around great coaches. I never worked with John Wooden, but I got to know Coach Wooden very, very well. I played for a really good coach in college in Wimp Sanderson. I was with Jim Herrick. We won a national championship. So we've all had people through our lives that have influenced us, but no one has influenced me more than you two guys. And you've always been there in the best of times and in the worst of times. I've always had both of you that I can call. And so I appreciate that about you two more than you guys will ever know. So Thank you for that, and thank you for what you've done for our families, because I mentioned the family. Some families aren't close. Some siblings aren't close, and families can drift apart, and they can end up living lives where they're not connected. But you guys have always made sure that our families are. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but just the impact. I just want to say thank you for that, and how you've influenced family to all of us.
I appreciate that you say that, Mark. I think it goes back to our dad dying that night, April 3rd, 1956 at 3:30 in the morning, and that's always stuck with me. But Coach Hudson and what he did, and Bill Harbaugh helped us, and Paul Fisher. But our families would always get together. When my dad was still alive, the uncles would come in from West Virginia and from Detroit, and the family would have a party going. It was family, and family first. And I always think, and I think, we never talked about this much, but the loss of our father was big, but it was a motivator too. But we're going to see him again in heaven.
Dad, family?
I feel the same way. When Dad passed away, our families became closer. The Harbaughs, the DePietros, our whole South Side, where we grew up. And we never forgot that. Now, the Harbaugh connection, Jack Harbaugh's mom and our mom were sisters. That was the connection there. But, we always stayed together, and we always stayed close. And I want to say one other thing about Crestline, Mark. When Dad died, we didn't have a lot of insurance. Well, Johnny had the eye surgery. He was going to have eye problems for we didn't know how long at that time. 1956, there were, 20 bars in Crestline, churches, everything. They had these jars, and it said Fritz Gottfried Memorial Fund. That was all. It was put in a bank, a trust for Johnny and his eye, and they raised $8,500 in 1956. And people put money in the jars, churches, and and I can remember going to Chicago. Henry Sin was a Booster Club president, and we flew to Chicago. And the reason for it, to see the top eye specialist in the world. It was in a big tower in Chicago. So Johnny and Heine and myself, and we went up there, and they examined, watched Johnny, and they checked him, different doctors. And then they came out and they told us that he's never going to have sight in the eye, and he needs to really get it removed. And we both just sat there and just crushed. Anyway, we went back on a train back to Crestline, and that money lasted, Mark, till he was 18 years old, and he had to get glasses. He had to, eye exams, and at nighttime when it was cold weather, it was like a hole in your tooth, and you could hear Johnny in the middle of the night crying because that air would get into his eye. But he did that from 7 years old to his 18, and I'll never forget, when he got 18, he said that he wanted to get his eye removed. And at that time, there was still money left for that surgery, and it was done in Bucyrus, Ohio. And the doctors told us, do not come back until we call you. And so they got Johnny out of bed after the surgery, and the nurse said, you're going to get up, we're going to walk a little bit. And they walked him out, and Mark, they took him in the in the lobby there. And there was a 16-year-old boy that was a paraplegic, injured in an accident. And the nurse said, Johnny stood there and looked at that young guy for the longest time. And he said, call my family. So we immediately went over there. We were 10 miles apart. We went over there, and he was 18 years old or 17, and he passed away at age 59, and he never once complained that he had one eye. I think that was a God thing too, that that paraplegic was placed in the lobby. He wasn't placed he was still in his room, and Johnny may not have seen him, and maybe he would have felt sorry for himself all these years. But he never once, he'd even take the eye out, artificial eye, and show the kids that I may have done it to you. I don't know. And, but how about that? He never once complained, ever. He played high school basketball. He was a point guard, right hand. He was a right-handed batter, and he didn't have a left eye. And he played. And he was a good athlete. He got a scholarship to go to Bluffton College. To play basketball. And nobody knew it. The visiting teams never knew it, or they would have, overplayed him, things like that. But he was a role model for us, even through the years.
The stories, and we could, I've grown up listening to the stories. It's interesting, John and Jim Harbaugh and we've talked about the stories, and the people. And the impact that you guys have had on so many people. And we could, I've grown up listening to story after story after story, and all of those, a lot of times we can tell people how to live, but what you guys have done is shown people how to live. And the stories that you tell, they always have such great meaning, and there's always a lesson in there. So,
Mark, I want to take one story, because we would be remiss if we didn't mention his name, Gates Brown. Gates came out of Crestline, went to jail. Shouldn't have went to jail, but he went to jail, and was in there for a couple of years. And then the Tigers and Indians came in, and the White Sox, and recruited him. And so the guy who the AD was, athletic director of the prison, he said, Gates, I'll take care of this. So Gates said, okay. So he sat there, and the Indians said they'll give him $100, $500 from Detroit. And so this guy stood up and he said, get out of here. He said, all you baseball guys, get out of here. He said, you're embarrassing me in front of my player. And so they got up, and Gates grabbed his arm, and he said, what are you doing? He said, don't worry, they'll be back. Gates said, they better be back, or I'll be in here for 13 more years and murdering you. But he signed a contract, went to the minor leagues. They yelled at him in the South, and he made it to the big leagues, and he has records, and as a pinch hitter. And Gates Brown was I took him out to Kelly Park. I said, Gates, you remember playing here? I said, you used to hit him over the trees. He said, right now, he said, I looked at it. He said that would be a fly out to the second baseman. But he was a great athlete, and great playing with Joe and Jack. And so we would be remiss if we didn't mention we had a big leaguer.
Hey, Mark, can I finish one story? My dad made me work ethic, taught me I was in the 5th grade, 10, 11 years old. And the grocery store was right beside our house. And Jack Harbaugh did this for 2 years, and then Jack gave it up. So my dad said, you're going to do the same thing Jack did for 2 years. And so I'm in the 5th grade, and I'm doing it. So I get the wheelbarrow over at the grocery store, and he put all these cupcakes and chocolate vanilla milk and sandwiches. And I would take that wheelbarrow, and it was a football length of the field for me to get to that Birch's factory. So in the morning, at 5 o'clock in the morning, or 6, whatever it was, I'd take that wheelbarrow down, and people would come up and buy sandwiches and so on like that. And I'd empty the wheelbarrow then, and I'd take it back to Ray Scheiber, and I'd go in, and he'd give me my quarter or 50 cents. I can't remember what it was. I did that for 2 years. I did it in the wintertime, but I think back, my dad and mom were teaching me work ethic. And I always have had a work ethic. I'm still fooling around. I'm 84 years old doing something.
I'm glad I missed the wheelbarrow.
Well, this has been unbelievable. And, like I've said, I want to say thank you to both of you, but thank you for being on the podcast. But just thank you for the impact you've had on me and my family, my children, and everybody. And this is going to be there's a lot of people going to enjoy watching and listening to this podcast. So anyway, I just want to say thank you guys. And you guys both know I love you very much. And
you impacted us, Mark.
Thank you.
You impacted us.
Well, thank you.
Mark, we're so proud. We're so proud of you and proud of Christy and what type of people you've become. I mean, and we're as proud of that. And I remember one time going to Kentucky, your first game at Kentucky as a player. I'll never forget that. Was one of the dad things, wishing that, God, you'd have seen Mark playing against Kentucky. Was Adolph Rupp there at the time? Coach?
It was a little after that. A little after that. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. And this has been incredible. So thank you very much.